Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Carlotta Rebello. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll be bringing you some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage on Monocle Radio, with highlights from our studios here at Midori House in London and also from around the world. This week,
the only way we'll ever get to that proverbial Europe whole, free and at peace is with a democratic Russia. Next time, we have to get it right, and it means that we have to be getting ready for that moment now.
We'll hear from recently released Russian opposition leader Vladimir Kara-Murza. Plus, we'll be in Abu Dhabi to hear the highlights from last week's Monocle Weekender.
There's nowhere else in the world where you can stand on the forecourt of the Louvre Museum, look across the water and you see the Guggenheim. If you wanted to do that today, you'd have to take a flight to do that. And so Abu Dhabi offers that kind of cultural aspect to this city now.
All that and much, much more over the next hour here on The Curator with me, Carlotta Rebello. In April 2023, Russian opposition voice Vladimir Kara-Murza was sentenced to 25 years in a Siberian prison colony due to his criticism of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. In a conversation with Andrew Muller for this week's edition of The Foreign Desk, Kara-Murza discussed his time in prison and laid out the case for how to ensure a post-Putin Russia becomes a healthy democracy and why those plans need to be made today. Andrew started by asking Vladimir to recount what it felt like to hear he'd been sentenced for 25 years.
Well, to be honest, my first thought was a job well done, because in the distorted Orwellian reality of Vladimir Putin's Russia, frankly, this is the highest mark of recognition one can get for political opposition work. I'm also a historian, so I couldn't help but think of the fact that this was the longest sentence for a political prisoner handed out in our country since the death of Joseph Stalin. And of course, it was a very pointed way in which my quote-unquote trial was organized. I mean, everything the Kremlin does is very deliberate, right? It's very in your face. So my 5 counts of criminal indictment were my 5 public speeches I had made against the war in Ukraine, against political repression and political murders in Russia, against the illegal nature in which Putin stayed in power in violation of term limits and so on. So these were my 5 official indictments or counts of indictment. But there was an unofficial one hanging over all of these, and this was, of course, my involvement in the international advocacy for targeted sanctions. Up until last year, I was absolutely certain that I was going to die in that Siberian prison. This exchange that rescued 16 of us from the hell of Putin's gulag last year in August 2024. Well, it was a miracle. Frankly, that's the only way I can describe it to this day. But it was, of course, in many ways a human-made miracle. But it was because it was made possible by the relentless advocacy, the relentless efforts of so many good people in democratic nations, parliamentarians, journalists, public figures, who throughout all of these years never stopped speaking out, shouting out on behalf of all those people in Russia who are imprisoned because of their public opposition to Putin's dictatorship and to the war in Ukraine. And this exchange really shows just how powerful public opinion in democratic countries really is. And it shows that democracies, when they stand on values and work together, are stronger and more effective than any dictatorship can ever hope to be.
How do you prepare for any sort of transformation that stops that being a problem? I mean, obviously you're right. Obviously what would be delightful is if, for example, Russia enjoyed the same relationship with, for example, the Baltic states as Germany now does with Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg. 3 small countries next to a once predatory mighty power, but absolutely nobody thinks there's any chance there of history repeating itself. How do you get to that?
I think the best way is to look at the mistakes that were committed back in the 1990s, the last time there was this window of opportunity in Russia and it was missed, and not repeat them again. And there were just 2 major mistakes in my view, both fundamental, one domestic, one international. The domestic mistake was the fact that Russia, after the collapse of the Soviet regime, never really went through this process that lawyers sometimes like to call transitional justice, but that is actually all about transparency and accountability. We know that any country that successfully transitioned from dictatorship to democracy has gone through such a process in different ways. In South Africa after apartheid, these were truth and reconciliation commissions. In Latin American states, after the fall of their military juntas, these were judicial tribunals. In Central and Eastern European states, after the collapse of communism, they had lustration procedures where they blocked people connected with the old regime from coming back to positions of power. Because when evil is not publicly reflected on and publicly condemned, it is going to come back. And this is what we saw with Putin coming back to power just 8 years after the collapse of the Soviet regime. This mistake cannot be repeated next time. After Putin and his regime are gone. And the second mistake, and this is where the West comes in, this is why it's so important to be having this conversation in London and in other Western capitals. The second mistake that happened in the 90s was committed from the side of the West, and it was the fact that the West was not really ready, or perhaps not willing, to help and assist that nascent democratic Russia on its way to democratic transition. In the same way, it was ready to assist and help and welcome countries like Poland and the former Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states that you refer to. I have a lot of friends in the political circles in many Central Eastern European countries, and every one of them tells me how important it was for them back in the 1990s to have that promise of European and Euro-Atlantic integration as the most powerful incentive imaginable to persevere with and complete these difficult democratic reforms. Václav Havel, when he spoke to the American Congress in February of 1990, described the whole process of post-communist transformation in Czechoslovakia as our return to Europe. This was his phrase. This was important for people. Russia never really had that promise in the early 90s.
But is there not a key difference, though, in that those Central and Eastern European countries wanted to be part of Europe and wanted to be part of the Western sphere precisely because they were frightened of Russia, whereas Russia is, of course, by definition, not necessarily frightened of itself?
Well, first of all, those Central and Eastern European countries were dominated and occupied first and foremost by the communist totalitarian regime in the Soviet Union. So it wasn't about countries. But secondly, and most fundamentally, Russia is just as much a European country as the Czech Republic or Poland or Romania. I mean, we've been part of Europe. I'm not even talking about geography. I mean, that's obvious. But we are the largest country in Europe geographically, even if you take only the part of Russia west of the Ural Mountains. But no, to me, this is much deeper. I mean, civilizationally, historically, mentally, culturally, in every way you look, I mean, Russia is an integral part of European civilization. And to your point that those countries wanted to be a part of the West, wanted to be a part of Europe. Well, so did Russia, because on the 20th of December, 1991, President Boris Yeltsin of Russia sent a letter to Manfred Werner, who was the then Secretary General of NATO. And in that letter, which was made public, Yeltsin officially and publicly for the first time raised the question of future Russian membership in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The 20th of December, 1991. The window of opportunity was open then. That letter never even got a response. A few years ago, this was before my arrest, I was writing an article about this for a Polish Foreign Affairs magazine, and I went to the libraries, to the archives in Washington and other places, just to look through the documents, the sources, the newspaper clippings, to see how was it even possible that something of this importance from the president of Russia is just completely ignored. And all the sources go back to the same point. As the New York Times article from that period put it, NATO officials were too taken aback by Yeltsin's letter to offer a coherent response. This is a quote. In other words, Western leaders were so shocked by the sudden collapse of the Soviet dictatorship because it was supposed to be forever, right? To go back to the title of the book. And then it was gone in 3 days. And people did not know what to do. Well, we know the cost of that failure. Because what happens in Russia affects everyone. And when Russia failed in its democratic transition domestically, that necessarily conditioned the aggressive vector of its policy towards other countries. You know, there's this direct correlation between internal repression and external aggression in Russia, because a government that doesn't respect the rights and freedoms of its own people is not going to respect the borders of its neighbors. It's not going to respect the norms of international law. And so that failure of democratic transition in Russia back in the 1990s had an enormous cost for everyone around our own country, of course now most tragically for the people of Ukraine. And this is a mistake that cannot be repeated the next time, because the only way we will ever have long-term peace and security in Europe, the only way we'll ever get to that proverbial Europe whole, free and at peace, is with a democratic Russia. Next time, we have to get it right. And it means that we have to be getting ready for that moment now.
That was the Russian opposition leader Vladimir Kara-Murza speaking to Monocle's Andrew Muller earlier this week. Next, to a highlight from Tuesday's edition of the Monocle Daily. The European Union has long been hailed, not least by itself, for bringing the continent together after the Second World War. But in reality, it has struggled to maintain that optimism and cohesion after the end of another conflict, the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. Many of the cracks exposed in the 1990s are now sundering further in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the rise of China. David Marsh is a writer and the founder of OMFIF Economic Research, and he spoke with Monocle's Chris Chermak about his new book entitled Can Europe Survive? The Story of a Continent in a Fractured World. Chris began by asking whether Europe had been overconfident and complacent about its ability to unite Germany and Europe after the Cold War ended.
There was a certain amount of complacency that it might be okay as it had been, as you say, against all the odds after the Second World War. On the other hand, Chancellor Kohl himself had a great deal of angst about the problems of integrating East Germany into the West. He knew it was going to cost a great deal of money. He knew that much of the rest of Western Europe was against German unification as well. He had to make that quid pro quo. A lot of Germans denied that there was a quid pro quo, but clearly there was an acceleration and intensification of the move towards monetary union. That had to be done as a way of somehow appeasing France in particular. Once Mitterrand became aware that Kohl was going to speed up somewhat the preparations towards monetary union, he became a lot less antagonistic about the unification of the two Germanys. Make no mistake, France could not have stopped that. That was going to happen anyway. But it was far better that that did take place on terms which were at least being looked at relatively kindly by France than that would lead to antagonism. So there were all these different elements at the time. I think that the role of America in both of those episodes was absolutely crucial. Without George H.W. Bush, there wouldn't have been, I think, unification in the way that there was. And all behind the scenes, I think America was always in charge of the European agenda all the years after the end of the Cold War. This is what pains me now, that America is plainly going down a different path.
Again, sticking with kind of that post-Cold War period, if there is some success in that, perhaps not the East Germany integration side, but there might be some success in the European Union's expansion eastward to Central Eastern Europe. You note in the book that much of Central and Eastern Europe has been kind of catching up in the last 3 decades or so, but of course antagonized Russia in the process. And I'm curious, when you look at that, you write about that dynamic a lot in this book as well. Was that inevitable, that sort of antagonism, in order to improve the fortunes of Central and Eastern Europe, or could things have gone differently?
I don't know about inevitable, but I certainly think it's logical that it would lead to some antagonism, whether through the military side or through the economic modernization side. There has been, if you like, a new gulf now between the successfully modernizing catch-up states of Central and Eastern Europe and Russia and the satellite states thereof, which do remain caught in something of a time warp. And it's exposed, I think, the vulnerabilities of the Russian economy, which is still very much an energy-dependent economy. It's failed to modernize, failed to diversify. And, of course, we now see a war economy. Over time, I think, Russia and its economic fundamentals will become more and more dire. And that's not going to help bringing about of a more modern, Western-orientated government in Moscow. But, of course, we went through a whole period of hope after Yeltsin came to an end, that this new, completely unheard-of man, Mr. Putin, was going to be a modernizer and a Western-orientated technocrat. So we did have moods of hope there, which, for various reasons, did turn into ashes.
We do absolutely have moments of hope, but also, and you write about this, perhaps a dismissiveness that came with that hope from Europe and the US maybe as well towards Russia, sort of failure perhaps to take it seriously after the Cold War, the sense that the US won, Russia lost, and you write about that. There's this one meeting you recount, I have to say, kind of stepping forward a bit on that, but gets to this, of the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker meeting Vladimir Putin. They're at 2 a.m. at a hotel. Putin brings out a Russian history book claiming Ukraine as, its historic territory, and Juncker counters that he has a book claiming that Prague was founded by the Grand Duke of Luxembourg and maybe he should instruct Luxembourg's army to invade the Czech Republic. I just found that little nugget so informative and fascinating because it gets to this point, perhaps. Did nobody in Europe take Vladimir Putin seriously? They kind of joked about these things until he actually invaded Ukraine.
It's a good point. I mean, of course, Mr. Juncker does have a very quirky sense of humour. What struck me about this was that this book, I'd really like to know what it is. It's a Cyrillic book that Mr. Putin takes everywhere with him. He took that to the G20 summit in Brisbane, as you say, in 2014, just after the more minor invasion of Ukraine with Crimea. It's clearly like a Bible, a travelling Baedeker to him. I think the principle that the Americans had after the fall of the wall was that indeed America had been victorious. The Cold War had ended in America's favour. However much they tried to do, it was quite clear that the Soviet Union, then became Russia, was the vanquished. You couldn't get over that Cold War victor mentality, I think, in the case of the Americans. However much people like Clinton tried to cover that up. Condi Rice told me that she said that wasn't the case, but I talked to her about her book. She did write in the book that she told the East Europeans on one occasion, we've won and you've lost. I think the other Europeans, of course, were far more mitigated, the Germans in particular, knowing the dangers of antagonizing the Soviet Union and then Russia, were trying to be far more condescending, far more magnanimous as well, vis-a-vis the Russians. But of course, the Americans were in charge. And I think America always knew that there was likely to be a war over Ukraine. That's something which came out pretty clearly from all the archives. And America was prepared to take that risk because America knew that whatever happened, it would be in charge and no doubt would emerge stronger from whatever conflict, whether military or political, was to ensue. And I think that's happened.
The author David Marsh speaking to Chris Chermak for Tuesday's episode of the Monocle Daily. Staying in Europe now as we head to Helsinki, where a woman-focused community called Charlie Goes To has been drawing crowds and attention. Our correspondent in the city, Petri Burtsov, went along to the latest edition of the event to find out what the platform offers, who attends, and why participants such as the former Prime Minister Sanna Marin believe it fills a gap that still exists, even in a country often labelled as one of the world's most gender equal.
A few hundred women from the capital and beyond have gathered at the Helsinki Dance House for the latest Charlie Goes To event. The crowd is a curious mix of business executives, political leaders such as the former Prime Minister Sanna Marin, as well as celebrities including models, actresses and artists. Since its inception, Charlie Goes To has become one of the most coveted and talked about female-focused events in Finland, with tickets selling out despite the price tag of several hundreds of euros. The idea comes from the actress and entrepreneur Mia Andruth, who founded the platform after noticing a recurring pattern in her own career and in conversations around her.
By starting to put women in the center of the story and also providing stories for women that relate and give them information, inspiration, and the outcome of that which was a fantastic company, a business, because turns out that women are great consumers and women want to hear stories about women who look and sound like them and who are living similar lives to them. So that was basically how Charlie came to be, and it was about finding alternative paths to have great careers and still living a wonderful life.
It was important from the get-go that Charlie Goes To won't be just another corporate-style women's networking event. The goal is that the participants have fun too.
When you combine information and entertainment. So, you can be ambitious, but you sure should have fun while doing it. And this is something that I think is the core element to all of these women who come to this event. And then also to find women who work in diverse professions, because whether you're starting a company or you're looking to build a corporate career, it helps to understand the marketing, the communication, the legal part, maybe politics. And then when you start having a network of women who who are ministers, they are lawyers, they are PR people, or they are journalists. You have a really good community to turn to and give you the best advice.
I think that's fantastic, and you're such a great example in regards to that.
But what goes on at these events? When Confect attends, there are talks by the likes of Prime Minister Marin, but also business leaders such as the Marimekko CEO Tiina Alahuhta-Kasko, plus visiting speakers such as the Los Angeles-based talent management superstar Alice Hampton.
First, we start with great vibes. So we always have good music, good food, and a lot of amazing ladies. But the event structure is so that we have panel discussions and interviews, but also I think what is the core to this and what is the most important thing to reach success and your career ambitions is that you have access to people. So that's what we are doing. We are creating access to people. And in this day today, like, it's so difficult to reach out to someone by email or getting a hold of them by phone because there's so much information. Everybody's just flooded. So you need to meet them face to face. So that's what we're providing, and access to people you might not in a regular setting maybe get access to. And then also in our panel discussions and in our interviews, we are applying Chatham House rules in the sense that we want to make the conversation honest. Because when we know what really goes on, it's not just the Instagram high reels or the LinkedIn hypes, then you get the solutions and to the core good stuff that you need to know in order to get your next steps.
The former Prime Minister Marin is a regular at the Charlie Goes To events. She says the event's cross-sector approach is what makes it stand out.
What makes it different is that it brings together women from quite different kind of backgrounds and different kind of fields, but still on discussing the same themes that combines these different backgrounds to discuss on the matters that we can still everybody share and feel, like how to combine family and working life, or how to have that confidence in your profession and in your working environment, and what can you learn from others to boost your own career and your own ambitions. And I think this is very valuable for women to have this kind of togetherness and sisterhood that you can feel here.
Finland is often portrayed as a model of gender equality, but Marin argues that work is far from complete, and that events focused on women remain necessary.
Well, if we look the world everywhere, we can all agree, and I hope we can agree, that the world isn't equal, not anywhere, not in the Nordics where we have maybe taking more steps towards equality, but still even in the Nordics we don't find us in that equal position. So I think it is still very important to also have that kind of women supporting women way of thinking, because women doesn't yet, unfortunately, have 50% of the world power and resources that we are entitled as a 50% of the world population. So I think it is very important to support women, and I'm dedicating my life to supporting women. And of course, if we support women, it doesn't mean that we want to exclude different views or men from the discussion. But I still find that it is important to have those places where women can relate, have discussions, and also have the perspective of other women, because they are all struggling with the same issues and they might feel quite alone. And then when you meet other women with the same takes, then you can feel also that you're not alone, you're a part of a group, and together we can make things happen.
Charlie Goes To began as a small invitation-only gathering. Today, it holds both large annual conferences and smaller, more intimate sessions throughout the year. For attendees, the appeal seems to be in its combination of access, informality, and candor. But the goal is broader, to seed future companies, leaders, and networks. But for now, in a crowded theater of the dance house, the focus remains simple: bringing women together and giving them the space to speak openly and to learn from each other. For Confect Corner in Helsinki, I'm Petri Burtsov.
Next, we're in the US for a highlight from The Urbanist. The presence of soldiers in the streets of cities in the United States has been an all too familiar sight in recent months. Beyond the political posturing going on, though, this urban boots-on-the-ground experience is rare for a military. So how do troops train for urban warfare? Monocle's Washington, D.C. correspondent Charlotte McDonnell-Gibson sent us this report on the challenges faced when training for combat in city environments.
It was an unusual suggestion made by President Donald Trump last month as he addressed the country's most senior military leaders at Quantico Marine Corps Base in Virginia. Training for urban warfare is notoriously tricky, given that under normal circumstances, novice soldiers can't march around bustling cities, fully armed, practicing complex and risky manoeuvres whilst surrounded by civilians. But that is exactly what Trump appeared to be suggesting as he pontificated on his recent deployments of the National Guard to Democrat-run cities, including Los Angeles and Washington.
But I want to salute every service member who has helped us carry out this critical mission. It's really a very important mission. And I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
The suggestion that US troops train in domestic cities understandably provoked outcry. But it does highlight a persistent problem facing militaries around the world. Most countries have plenty of options for training for open warfare, much less so for urban combat, even as global urbanisation means that those environments are the most likely future battlefields. The irony, however, was that Trump was speaking just a few kilometres away from 3 dedicated urban warfare training facilities on the Quantico base. The largest mocked-up city is known as Mout Town, getting its name for the acronym for Military Operations in Urban Terrain. It dates to the Cold War, and its low-rise buildings on narrow streets were designed to resemble a European city. For decades, new US Marines have been put through their paces at the decidedly lo-fi Mout Town, even as the design, architecture and technology of modern cities has changed dramatically. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Breslin, warfighting director at Quantico's Basic School, said there is still great value in the exercises they do here, given that the fundamentals of urban warfare can be applied in different theatres.
Not all urban areas, urban corridors look the same. There's really very few that represent a mega urban complex anywhere on a Marine Corps base. But if we can get them to understand on a micro level, how do we apply what we learned against a larger problem set, then that's a win. Entering a building is still entering a building, whether it is a mud building or the brick structures that I saw in Iraq, or if you're in a shanty town made, largely of corrugated metal, you would still need to apply the same mindset and the same techniques to get through that.
And these days, Mout Town is getting plenty of action as the Marines pivot for a new age of technological warfare where the urban environment plays an increasingly central role.
I would say that as humans begin to cluster towards urban centers, that is where conflict will likely occur. So that isn't to say that's only where it will occur. You can look at parts of the world right now where that's not true, but Ukraine, as an example, has had urban conflict and what looks like traditional World War I trench line conflict. We have to be able to operate in both.
During the 29-week training program at the Basic School, the men and women selected as Marine Corps officers get the fundamental grounding to lead their riflemen into battle, covering weapons training, martial arts, arduous hikes, land navigation and tactical planning. The training culminates in an urban warfare attack scenario where they consolidate their learning in a real-world environment, says Company Commander Captain Micah Thomas.
What we consider advanced a little bit is the urban environment, just because, looking at structures and buildings, the 3D environment, different windows, doors, angles, everything. So we consider this advanced for them. So they're going through at the platoon level and really attacking their peers, which are their adversary, going through a lane with several buildings in that to clear them and then seize an objective that they've been tasked with.
The trainers stress that the instruction at the urban training facilities at Quantico is the first step in a Marine's journey, and they will go on to other advanced training elsewhere. The most sophisticated urban warfare training facility in the US is the Muscatatuck Urban Training Center in Indiana, a sprawling former mental institution that now consists of 300 structures over 100 acres and includes a cave complex, a reservoir, and mock-ups of different geographical urban environments, including a shantytown and a roundabout. And the US is not the only military developing new training grounds for urban warfare. In March this year, Singapore officially began training at Safety City, billed as the most technologically advanced urban training facility in the world. It is designed to simulate a densely populated modern city and includes 12-storey office towers among its 72 buildings, many interconnected and with subterranean elements. It has a mocked-up light rail system and storm drains and 11,000 sensors, which provide real-time feedback such as counterfire. Then there are advances in artificial intelligence and virtual and augmented reality, which give soldiers an increasingly realistic experience of urban warfare without having to worry about any civilians wandering into harm's way. The new synthetic training environments now integrate artificial and augmented reality, AI and haptic technology, which mimics tactile sensation, so that scenarios are responsive to the soldiers' actions in real time, creating immersive and realistic training environments which would be impossible to undertake in a real city. There are also virtual reality copies of cities in North and South Korea, as well as American cities such as New York and San Francisco, meaning that Trump's dream of having troops train in Democrat-run cities is already happening in the metaverse, if not real life. But for all the virtual developments, these digital simulations can never replace live training. So even though it's looking a little dated, Mountown will likely continue to be stormed by enthusiastic new Marines for many years to come.
Monocle's Washington, D.C. correspondent Charlotte McDonald Gibson there. Still to come on The Curator, we head to Taiwan to meet the director behind the country's entry for next year's Academy Awards. In our On This Day historical series, we recall one of the most momentous openings of a door in modern history, and we stop off in Abu Dhabi for a wrap of the latest Monocle Weekender. Stay tuned.
Craft matters, in small ways, like how a coffee is brewed, and in not so small ways, like how your money is cared for, which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft, tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies, all happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the heart of it all. UBS, banking is our craft.
You're with The Curator, our weekly highlights show here on Monocle Radio. I'm Carlotta Rebello. Next, let's head to Taiwan. Left-Handed Girl is the country's Oscar entry for next year's Academy Awards. It was directed by Shih-ching Tsou, a longtime collaborator of Oscar-winning director Sean Baker from Anora. He also produced, edited and co-wrote this film. Monocle Radio's senior correspondent Fernando Augusto Pacheco met Shih-ching in London to discuss the film.
我觉得这应该很奇妙。各位小朋友，我们今天有新同学哦。妈，你姐有没有觉得是接你？没有，可是姐说有就是有。
Shih-ching Tsou, what a pleasure talking to you. I loved Left-Handed Girl. What a beautiful film. My first question to you, is it true? I was reading an interview that is there a personal touch to it as well? That when you were a kid, you were also kind of a left-handed girl as well.
Yeah, but I didn't even remember that because I got corrected so early on. I probably in kindergarten by the teacher. So the first time I kind of recognized that was in high school. You know, when I used a knife with my left hand, my grandfather told me it's a devil's hand. You know, he scolded me. He was really strict. And he said that you shouldn't use that. I remember that so vividly because I didn't understand. I wasn't left-handed. But when he said that to me, it's a sense of guilt, you know, like shame. You feel like I did something wrong. I did something I'm not supposed to. So I always remember that. And when I went to New York after I graduated from college, I went to get my master's degrees in media studies at New School. I ran into Sean in the editing class. And, you know, we bonded through. We love the same type of movie, like Dogma 95, war cinema, Korean cinema. So we kind of, you know, telling ourselves, well, maybe we should make something together, you know, because it's really rare you find somebody that like the same type of movie you like, you know, you have sensibility. It's from there I told him about this thing my grandfather told me. So he thought that sounds like a wonderful idea to turn into a movie script. So that's in 2001, we went to Taiwan the first time to try to find a story. So, you know, went all the way back to like 25 years ago.
Amazing. I'm left-handed as well. So
okay.
I feel connected with that.
Ah, so you didn't get corrected.
No,
good.
But my father did. He was also left-handed and he was corrected at his time. But then things have changed.
Right.
What about Sean Baker? You have a very long-standing professional relationship with him. You guys met at university, right?
Yeah, well, he already, when I went there, I was I was getting my master's degree, and he already graduated from Tisch he learned film with a very traditional film camera and cutting room, cutting the negative. So he went back to new school to learn the nonlinear editing, Abbey editing. So that's how we met. If I never met him in school, I'll probably never make movie because that wasn't my goal. I didn't even know that could be a career. Because coming from Taiwan, it's very traditional. They just want you to study. They want you to study and graduate and get a stable job, right? So being an artist is never really a goal or any. They don't want you to be an artist because it's unstable. So if I didn't meet him, I'll probably never make movie.
你们在看什么？
囡仔人有耳无嘴。
又是陈三明，为什么没有读大学？
你要是老是这样子的话，那我就让给别人去做哦。你若唔多手，你就政府咧推魔鬼做代志，你听我。
And of course, Left-Handed Girl is Taiwan's entry for the Oscars this year. I mean, how do you feel? Because great reception for the film. The reviews have been great. But tell us how do you feel about this?
Well, it feels like it's like a impossible mission. First when we trying to advocate in Taiwan because they have this small 7 people committee to pick the movie every year. And in the beginning, we didn't even know what to do because I never worked in Taiwan before. So people don't know who I am.
This is your first production
in Taiwan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it feels really, very scared when I first went back because nobody knows who I am. And on top of that, I'm doing something very different from every other film. So it was a little bit frightening, how people are going to, perceive, how they going to look at this film. So it was really surprised when I found out we got picked as the film. It was really, really surprised.
Amazing. And how do you see the Taiwanese film scene? Is that something that perhaps you would like to go back and make other films there, or because I know you have a life in the US as well. So how do you see for your future projects?
Well, I definitely want to make more film in Taiwan, but not just Taiwan though, because I've been traveling on the festival circuit and I visit different cities and I talk to people there. I always found interesting stories. So I wanted to go to a different country and tell different stories from, to show a different city, to kind of, showcase different city and showcase different culture, but always with the stories that really, matter, that connects with people, human stories.
Well, I personally am dying to go to Taiwan, to Taipei, because
Please.
The food-wise, I know it's not very roots, but Din Tai Fung, right?
Yeah.
I literally go for lunch there every day.
Oh, really? Here?
Here in London.
Oh my God. Aren't they expensive?
Well, a little bit.
Yeah.
So that was my start of kind of being curious about Taiwan.
Okay.
Its food scene.
Oh my God.
Do you recommend me to be there?
You have to go. I was joking to other people, and they were talking, especially distributors throughout the world. When I meet them, you had to ask your boss. You have a company travel every year. You should ask them to go to Taiwan, and you'll have this night market tour. It'll be so fun.
Shih-ching Tsou, director of Left-Handed Girl there. And you can listen to the full interview by subscribing to the Monocle Weekly. Just head over to monocle.com/radio. Next, to the latest installment of our historical series On This Day. In this week's edition, Monocle's Andrew Muller recalls one of the most momentous openings of a door in modern history.
In late 2025, just a few weeks ago as of this broadcast, Egypt opened the long-delayed Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza on the outskirts of Cairo. Among the astonishing treasures contained therein are those with which the pharaoh Tutankhamun was delivered into eternity in around 1323 BC or so. These are doubtless spectacular even for museum visitors who have bought a ticket with a fair idea of what they're going to see. Tutankhamun's gold funerary mask has a reasonable claim to be placed among the most recognizable objects on Earth. Imagine, though, seeing that, and all Tutankhamun's other stuff, without having any preconceived idea of what it would look like, or even being certain that any of it existed. Imagine being the first person to gaze upon it for the thick end of 33 centuries. On November 26, 1922, Howard Carter became exactly that.
At first I could see nothing, the hot air escaping from the chamber causing the candle flame to flicker, but presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues and gold, everywhere the glint of gold.
Carter had been bitten early by the ancient Egypt bug. As a chronically ill child, the youngest of 11, growing up in Norfolk, he'd been indulged by a local family of eccentric aristocrats who had a large private collection of Egyptian artifacts. By the time he was 17, they had arranged for him to learn on the job at excavations at various locations in Egypt. By the time Carter was 25, he was Inspector of Monuments for Upper Egypt for the Egyptian Antiquities Service. Tutankhamun had also acquired seniority at a young age. He became the 13th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty when he was around 8 years old. In another sense, Tutankhamun never acquired seniority at all. He died before he was 20, though not before fathering 2 children and presiding over what is regarded as something of a golden age. By 1922, Carter's Egyptological pursuits had been disrupted by a falling out with and resignation from the Egyptian Antiquities Service and World War I, during which he stayed in Cairo as an interpreter/spook attached to the intelligence department of the British War Office. But he'd acquired a patron with a comparable fascination with ancient Egypt and capacious pockets, George Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Carter's team, led by Egyptian foremen Ahmed Jeriga, Gas Hassan, Hussein Abu Awad and Hussein Ahmed, had been digging a while in the area known as the Valley of the Kings without much result, and were on the verge of packing it all in when, on November 4th, they discovered what looked like the top of a staircase blocked with rubble. When this was cleared, it revealed a closed door, as Carter recorded in his diary.
Towards sunset we had cleared down to the level of the 12th step, which was sufficient to expose a large part of the upper portion of a plastered and sealed doorway. Here before us was sufficient evidence to show that it really was an entrance to a tomb, and by the seals, to all outward appearances, that it was intact.
Carter, not wanting his patron to miss the moment, had the stairway filled back in and cabled Carnarvon, telling him to get himself to Egypt as swiftly as possible. This being olden times, Carnarvon reached Cairo on November 20th. On this day, 103 years ago, Carter made a small breach at the top left corner of the door, lofted his candle and peered inside. Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied, "Wonderful things."
2 strange ebony black effigies of a king. Gilded couches in strange forms, lion-headed, heifer-headed, and beast infernal. Strange black shrines with a gilded monster snake appearing from within. Finely carved chairs, a golden inlaid throne. A lovely lottiform wishing cup in translucent alabaster. A confusion of overturned parts of chariots glinting with gold.
And that, it turned out, was only the antechamber. Howard Carter spent another decade meticulously cataloguing the contents of Tutankhamun's complete tomb, more than 5,000 items. It remains the most famous archaeological discovery of all time. By way of illustrating the daunting length of Carter's shadow, early in 2025, archaeologists found the first pharaoh's tomb since Carter first glimpsed Tutankhamun's treasures. It belonged to one of Tutankhamun's ancestors, Pharaoh Thutmose II. There was, however, nothing in it.
Monocle's Andrew Muller there. And finally, on today's show, we head to Abu Dhabi, where the Monocle Weekender wrapped up last Sunday. Over 3 days, Monocle subscribers and readers joined our team for tours, tastings, and special access across the city. From the opening of the new Natural History Museum to a VIP walk through the Abu Dhabi Art Fair, the group enjoyed rare moments and plenty of stories to bring home. They also spent time with Monocle's editor-in-chief Andrew Tuck, our Gulf correspondent Inzaman Rashid, and the head of radio Tom Edwards. They've sent us their reflections on the event. Here's Tom.
Looking back at the wrap of a really terrific Monocle weekender here in Abu Dhabi, I don't know, it's kind of one of my favourite formats, if you like, that Monocle does, because it's about lots of things that we care about, convening great people, really interrogating a locale in a different way with some really fresh perspective. It's also quite good fun.
It's fun. Roughly 30 people come on these weekenders. We're on the road quite a lot. We're going to restaurants. We're eating local food, meeting the best chefs, getting the inside scoop on a place. But by the end of it, people have, exchanged cards, made friends, and the bonhomie between people has been absolutely extraordinary. I think yesterday, going to the Abrahamic family house and then ending up at the Louvre for lunch, sitting on that terrace, that it was just amazing to see the closeness of these people and the bonds that have been formed. And let's point out that some of these people have been to maybe 10 events with us now, that they come back again and again because they realise that they can see a place in a way that only Monocle can really help them do.
Izzy, that must be kind of exciting. Well, I guess in your day-to-day as our correspondent covering the whole of the Gulf region, but of course from your station in Dubai and popping up regularly to Abu Dhabi, it's an exciting opportunity, right, to ensure that our audience in print, on the radio, in all of our formats is getting the real picture of what's happening in this region, right?
Hugely important. There's so many misconceptions, Tom, about this region, but also about the UAE. People see what they see on social media, particularly kind of Instagram and TikTok and things like that, and there is there's an odd kind of perception about what this region offers. But we've been here for the last few days now. The hospitality has been incredible. The culture scene now across Sadia Island in particular is amazing. There's nowhere else in the world where you can stand on the forecourt of the Louvre Museum, look across the water and you see the Guggenheim. If you wanted to do that today, you'd have to take a flight to do that. And so Abu Dhabi offers that kind of cultural aspect to this city now, which I think is really exciting for a relatively young country as well. And I think it's really nice for people to come and just break down some of that stigma that is around the UAE in particular. And we've had some guests on this trip, particularly, from America as well, who've spoken so openly about their thoughts about the UAE prior to being here. Then they've landed in town and they've gone, actually, it is nothing like what we expected. And they're messaging friends and showing them photos. And that, for me personally, as someone who now calls this place home, it's just so nice to see.
And Andrew, tell me a little bit about what it does for you to take a little bit of inspiration. It's not bad to get away from the leaden skies of London, let's be clear. But also, it is great, isn't it, to go and interrogate these things, to visit these kind of attractions, to talk to different people. It's fundamentally important in the work that we do every day, right? But it's no little bit inspiring?
It is inspiring. Look, this is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. You don't have to pay income tax. It attracts people who are incredibly entrepreneurial. Some of the inspirational things, I think, are the conversations we have in many developed countries around migration, about whether we can welcome outsiders, what kind of outsiders. And here they've kind of worked out who they want, who they think is a good partner for them. And then once people come here, it's amazing to see how people park all animosity, get on with the project. And I think from you sense it from the leadership all the way down, that people come here because they want to work incredibly hard, be committed. I don't think there are many people here fighting about, working from home 3 days a week and, work-life balance. That is part of the deal. I don't think people who move here should think that it's for an easy life. I think people move here because they're incredibly driven. And if you want partnerships on that, this is a place to start. So I think for inspiration for me, it is a little bit about what you can do when you're totally invested in a project, when you have full belief in something, when you have leadership that actually is courageous, then suddenly, stuff begins to happen.
Our thanks to Andrew Tuck, Tom Edwards and Inzaman Rashid for that report. Well, that's all we've got time for on this week's edition of The Curator. This show was produced by Sam MP and presented by me, Carlotta Rubello. Join us again next week to hear some of the very best of the programs here on Monocle Radio. Goodbye and thanks for listening.